copy and then paste it on your chat, which I shall do right away now. So just initiating. That's the YouTube link, Chris, on your chat, and the LinkedIn link. Okay, so the YouTube is working. I can verify that. And maybe another 30 seconds for our LinkedIn feed to be active before we go live. Yeah, it is active now. So I'm going to open that up, Control C, and move it across here again. And paste the same with you, for you here. Yeah, there we go. Send. So Chris, we are all set. We are already live on Liverside. So I guess people have been through our preamble so far. So Chris, thank you for joining me. I guess it is lovely and sunny here on May Day. I had my daughter performed in her for May Day at the local school. So there had been a high school musical performance out there today with a lot of vintage car going up and down the roads.
Nice.
So that was my morning. Um, what about you? How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. I got up, I went to bed with a great idea, woke up, thought of an even better idea. My mind's just always racing. Right? Always trying to figure out how to get this AI to code as best as possible for people who have no coding experience or programming knowledge whatsoever. How do I get them to that point, right? And
Tell us a bit
constantly,
about yourself, Chris, for the audience, for those who may not know you. Obviously, I've known you for a few weeks now. I'm amazed at some of the
okay.
stuff you're doing, but best it comes from you. So who are you, Chris?
I'm currently going to return back to college for a master's degree, studying mass communications. I'm also taking PhD level computer science courses at the same time. And funny enough, never taken a computer course in my life. I've just used AI and YouTube to, train myself on how to do all this stuff. I've been kind of doing these things for a couple years now, and I really enjoy the coding and the solving the problems and using AI to help with those problems. It's been a lot of fun. So it's been interesting, right? I've only been, you know, doing programming and writing code for a couple of years, but I feel like with AI, right? AI just boosting my learning and how fast I'm able to actually learn with using AI as like a teammate to help me. It's incredible how
It's level
quickly
the playing field. It's level the playing field. It's made it
it really
equal
has.
for everyone to, create some things amazing. So in the I think you have been championing vibe coding, chaos coding, but at the same time putting a lot of structure around it, right? So I've seen
Yes.
some of the work you have done taking Spark, the methodology from Roov and within the Agentics Foundation community that we are both part of. And kind of I had always been thinking this is great, but how do we make it accessible for people? And I think that is where you seem to have cracked the nut quite a lot, actually. So
Yes.
tell us more about like your journey in the last couple of months. What has it been like? 2, 3
Okay.
months,
So
last quarter?
my journey kind of started about a year ago, right around this time. I was about to graduate with a business and marketing degree at K State, and I was like, well, what do? I need a product to sell, essentially. And well, what am I going to do? So, I had been using ChatGPT for a while to, you know, with the goal of, you know, I was using it in all of my school projects and everything the school was asking me to do. I was using it to help with that. And my goal was each time I was using it to try to get it to figure out how to give me the best answer possible. Right. And so I was, there's like an unlimited number of things you can do with these AI models and different ways to be creative and innovative with the way that you prompt them to, you know, do all kinds of, to get it to do the things that you want it to do, to get it to spit out the output that you're looking for. And so I'd gotten really good at that. And then I was like, hey, why don't I just tell it to write me a program? Right. And it was like, boom, spit out a program. I was like, okay, what do I do with this? I copied the program, I put it into a notepad file, and then, I saved it as a .py, and then I ran it in MS DOS or, command prompt. Right. And I was like, and then it was like, okay, well, that doesn't work. You need to install pips. All right, let me do that. So I just followed everything like it was a recipe. Right. And that's how I started writing code. And after 2 weeks, I had, so I, in the first week, I'd written a program. It was like a marketing chat bot that would join a TikTok channel of an influencer for the company I was working for at the time. And then it would monitor the chat. And anytime somebody talked about something that, might reference that company, or might be something, might be a message that somebody might have needed this credit repair. It was a credit repair company, and this guy was a auto influencer that ran people's credit, right, to see if they could purchase a car. So anytime anybody talked about credit, the AI model would pick up on that, and then the company had like say 10 advertisements, and it would analyze, you know, this is what this person has said. This was their chat history. Which advertisement should I link to them to most likely get this exact person to purchase the product? And it sent them a message, right, on TikTok. And that was really cool. And I was like, okay, how can I get this everywhere? So by 3 weeks in to first programming with AI, I then was like messing around on Twitch, and I ended up recording everybody on Twitch TV, right? Millions and millions of people. I started saving the everything that was said into CSV files. Turns out that was like over 1 billion messages a day, right? So I had to cut that back. And then, right, because I was wanting to use it with AI, and so I cut it down to just messages over 5 words in length and only in English. And because AI can understand English a lot better than other languages. And then I started looking for people laughing in the messages, right? And then every time somebody laughed, I had the AI create me a program that would clip whatever happened in that stream that caused that user to laugh, right? And so I ended up loading those clips into like a headless browser, and then just having a stream of clips. And so anytime anybody laughed across like 20 plus million people across like, usually it's like 300 to 500,000 live channels at any given moment. Anytime somebody laughed, I clipped it, right? And then just had like a stream of really funny clips. And that was like within the first month of me using AI to code, right? Having like no coding experience whatsoever. And then I tell, and then school starts back up, and I tell the head of one of the computer science labs at K State, I'm recording all these kids on Twitch. This like mostly men, 15 to 34 years old. And she was the direct person that dealt with the Department of Defense and getting funding from them for, research that they wanted the university to do. And, the Department of Defense was kind of curious in what all the military age men were doing, right? Like millions of them were up to, right? And so she was like, why don't you come along? And then I was like, okay. And then I started, and she was like, why don't you show off one of the projects that you're working on? So I was like, was also working on another project. So I was capturing everything from like video game channels. And so I
Hmm.
was in particular doing this test on, at the time, Elden Ring. It was a really popular game that had just come out. And so I had recorded like 2 weeks of just Elden Ring chat. And then I had asked ChatGPT,
The game, right? The Elden
yeah,
Ring
I
game.
was
Yeah,
like,
I
how
keep
can
seeing that.
I get the AI model to identify certain messages, right? So it walked me through how to do supervised learning, and I fine tuned a BERT model so that anytime somebody was talking about, say, the first boss, it captured all those messages, or if somebody was talking about the gameplay or the graphics, right? And then
Hmm.
it captured all the messages and then put them in order, and so that you could then analyze all of the data, and the gaming companies could then know exactly what their community was saying about the game, and then be able to tailor the game to what the community liked or didn't like, right? And that was like that was within like the first 3 months I was doing all of this. And then I got started getting crazy, and I was like, you know what, ChatGPT, how do I build you, right? And then and then I started following those steps, and like step one was like, well, you need to go get this 80 terabyte download file, this data set to first start training the AI model. I was like, well, I don't have 80 terabytes. That was like $2,500 for a 100 terabyte hard drive. I was like, you know what? Put it, you
So
know,
just on this note, like, what's your setup? Like, this is an awesome, basically, amount of work that you have done, right? In terms
mhm,
of that will obviously require a level of infrastructure to support it, whether it be compute or storage. Obviously, there's cloud, but right from starting from basics, which is where I think you said
mhm.
you. But I'm just curious, did you have a background before that? But you said you probably started proper programming a couple of years ago, right? So,
Nope.
like,
Didn't have any programming experience before last year. I mean,
right.
I've played video games, and then I've like edited a few files in the video games to like for whatever reasons to make the graphics or the game run smoother. But other than that, I didn't do anything with any programming whatsoever.
So what's your kind of setup like? Like, is it just a laptop that you
I've got
have,
I've
or
got a I've, I've got a computer with like an i9 processor, a 10
right?
a 10 gigabyte hard drive, extra hard drive, or 10 terabyte rather, and I got a laptop that's not very powerful, and I don't even have a very good GPU. Right? I don't have a good laptop. I don't have a really good setup. I do have access to like K State's BayoCat, which is like a big supercomputer that does have a number of really nice AI GPUs that I can access when I want. So that's really cool. But yeah, I was a lot of that stuff at first. I was just training on my CPU, and yeah, it would take weeks for some of these AI models to like fine tune and train off of like hundreds of thousands or millions of lines of data. But I just let it run, and took a long time.
Do you have any of that to be that you are able to or you're allowed to show, like some of the programs and outputs that you showed on Twitter and oh, sorry, on Twitch, and do you have
Yeah,
something that you can show?
I
Yeah.
think I have some of the stuff on my GitHub. I don't know if I can
Okay.
where I got it like stored somewhere on like my D drive. And like one of the other things I did is I recorded on Twitch um, all of the messages 5 days before the election and 5 days
Right.
after the election, right? And analyzed everything everybody was saying. And one thing that I found was really interesting is like I had the AI model like calculate how many like well first it did topic modeling and did all the topics that were happening at the time, and of course the election was the hot topic and was actually the thing that was most spoken about on Twitch during this time frame. And the thing that I found that was very interesting is the talk about Trump and the talk about Kamala was
Hmm.
was pretty even, right? On like, and the AI was like, yeah, and judging sentiment and everything, it was like, yeah, there's pretty much similar amount of people going for each person. But when you looked at the users talking about Trump, let's say there was 100,000 messages in pro favor of Trump, it would have been like 85, 90,000 people that said those messages. But out of 100,000 pro Kamala messages, it was only 20,000 people talking, actual users, right? And it was like the Kamala voters way more vocal, right? They were just like insanely more vocal. Like it appeared as if it was the same number of messages, but like a fourth of the amount of people saying that. And I thought that was really interesting. Um, I like data, right? I like analyzing large amounts of data. You find really cool stuff in it. And then I did a study on misogyny, and this was studying how many misogynistic messages. I took like 65 female streamer channels, had like 500,000 messages, and analyzed how often there was a misogynistic message that occurred. And I did a study and report on that. It was like 1 in 1,000. It was actually quite a lot, right? Considering that these girls might get 10,000 plus messages a day, having say 10 to 20 misogynistic comments. In real life, women don't just have people randomly coming up to them 10, 20 times a day saying some mean misogynistic thing to them, right? It's just not like a thing that happens every single day
Hmm.
in that amount. It was actually a lot. And the thing that was odd is like I was trying to get this paper through to get um, published, and it was going through male reviewers, and all the males were like, "Oh well, 1 in 1,000. That's really good. You should have talked about how great Twitch's security or guardrails are on the chat, right? And how great that is. I was like, it's not that great, guys, right? But they were literally denying my paper for not focusing on that. Like, it was crazy,
Okay.
right? Academics is crazy.
So I hear about. I mean, I think that's. I think the point about the data and what it tells and the ability to dig into it, which is amazing. I want to just bring us back a little bit to the your journey about the adoption of AI, right? In terms of the Spark, and I think our whole
Mhm.
point about the Spark methodology. You have in recent, I think they shared a couple of customizations. So they want to, the point being how to allow the whole Spark methodology to be adopted more easily. So you have
Mhm.
had a couple of examples. Would you like to share a little bit more about those, including, I think,
Yep.
as you call the Uber prompt, like for anyone to come with an idea and then how to proceed
Mhm.
to create something meaningful. And I think you
Yeah.
also shown about um, the use of some of the large language models, how you make the choices.
Mhm.
So feel free to kind of share your screen or anything that you might want to make it
Okay.
more exciting. Yeah, I see.
Well, with Rue,
Yeah.
with the Rue modes and Reuben's setup, I first was trying to figure out. Well, I was playing with it, right? And then I was like, these are the things I don't like about it. So I came up with my own custom room modes where I was adding in, say, microtasking, and then I added in research-driven development with Perplexity, and then I added in a software architecture problem prediction ontology, which was essentially like, hey, if you're going to go code in this connection from the back end to the front end, these are like, say, 8 errors that normally happen or cause problems when doing this. Make sure you avoid these errors. And I did this in hopes that it would give better code. And it did give better code. But it turns out that the AI code is so bad that increasing it is just a small increment. It was just a very small increment. Um, and and so that didn't work out so well, right? And then, but I mean, it did work out well, but eh, it was kind of pointless because what I did find out is that the testing is everything. Okay, so
Mm,
AI need, like, by setting up a testing system, you're setting up a reward system for the AI, and so
mm,
if you set up the perfect tests, then the AI might take 4, 5, 600 attempts to pass the test, right? But as soon as it does pass it, it's good, then it can move on. And that's the way to use AI to code. And so from trying to set up and do everything in my custom way and learning all this stuff, I was able to learn truly what really mattered, right? And that's the tests. And so what I have set up here that you see on screen is well, first a prompt, right? And the prompt is to get you started. And by on the Uber prompt Spark there, if you want to pull that up. Yes. So
of course, yeah.
that's basically everything you should think about when writing a program. Like, what is your elevator pitch to sell this program? What are all the architecture or the coding languages you're going to use? What Basically everything that you need to think about when building a program, this goes down that list. And you can answer this yourself. You can feed it to an LLM, tell the LLM to answer it, have it do deep research to answer all these questions. Like, give it like your basic idea and then do deep research to answer these questions. And this will give you a huge prompt, which you can then feed into Rue modes to kind of
Hmm.
kickstart off Rue modes. And the first thing then Rue modes is going to do with Reuven setup with Spark is it's going to send it to the deep research. And the deep research is then going to fill in all the knowledge gaps with its recursive search, right? Yeah, that deep research mode right there. That's where it should start off. And then once that comes back, then that'll get fed to all that. It'll save a huge research report, a lot of documents. Yeah, just like that. And it's amazing. And
This one, right?
yeah,
So
yep,
this is
it'll set it up like
the
that
structure that it
structure.
comes back with from your huge prompt. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And then it'll fill in all the gaps and then basically everything that your AI coding assistant is going to need to know throughout the entire course of building the entire project be right there. And then the spec writer will come out and give kind of like an overview of how everything should be set up, and then it'll transfer that. It'll go to the architecture, and it'll develop the entire structure and framework. It'll document it all out, and then it'll go to the coder, and it'll start coding it all out. Okay, and then it'll code out a structure and a framework. And once that's all built and the whole groundwork and everything's built, then we need to start setting up tests, right? And this is where knowing what tests to set up or telling the AI what tests to set up, this is the hard part. This is like
May I
the
ask a
mhm,
question at this point? So obviously
yeah.
it's great about the whole research. So you basically said, this is what I want, this is how I want, this is what what's the broad to do out of scope. We've had a specs written down, then obviously it is coded. But is it right that the coder and the tester work in conjunct, or basically as a team? So do we only code, like, if you adopt a test-driven approach, so you only code a small function or a small feature first and fully test it before you go and code the
No,
next one? It's that? No, that's not
no,
how you
you
have
you
seen it.
you
Okay.
want to code out the entire framework, like basically you want a vibe code, right? You like want a
Mm,
vibe code. You want to get something like roughly structured, roughly set up, what you want. It should code out a lot, right? Quite a bit. Like pretty much like most of the program should be coded out before the tester goes in, because it needs to know what all the code is, what all is happening, so it knows what to test, right? You can't just like code out a function and then test that function, but what are you testing it against? There's nothing else to test it against. You need a code, you know what I mean? You need to
mm. No, no, I asked because I think initially when this framework was built out, I think as it says here within the TDD bit, the point was about writing tests first and refactoring after minimal implementation passes. So I was just trying to understand, like in reality, when you have gone about, how did you encounter the tester, or did you change the definition of tester to an
no,
extent?
no, I
No.
mean, I
Okay.
kept it the same, but it,
Right.
it does it does just say writing tests for, I don't know, but all I know is when I use the program, it writes out the code, it builds the architecture and the framework, and then it does the tester.
Okay.
Maybe it's part of the
Fair enough.
custom rules. Like when you do the root modes install, he's got like 8 folders all with different rules. So and
Hmm.
in there,
Hmm. Hmm.
it probably lays out the Spark framework and how it works a little bit better too. I would imagine when you do the npx install.
Fair enough. Fair
But
enough. Okay.
so and the tests are everything, right? Like as long as you set up the tests in a way so that if every test passes, then your program works perfectly, then all you do is you
Hmm.
tell the AI pass all the tests, right? It's literally that simple. But setting up the perfect test, that's the hard part. And so what I've been focused on in the last couple of days is figuring out how to get AI to set up the best test. Because right now you need somebody that kind of knows what they're doing, like a really smart computer person to that knows exactly what is coming, what is being built, what exactly needs to be tested for, and then they tell AI that. But I want to know, how do I get AI to just know that and
Hmm.
just do that for me telling it to set up tests? So what I came up with was at first I was putting the entire code, like I would write a file, and it would then take my entire code base, and it would copy the file name, the file path, and then all the contents of the file into a single text document, and then put like a three dash break, and then copy every single
Hmm.
file, right, in my code. And then
Would you like to show that? Show us
yeah,
how your setup looks like.
yeah, I can do that.
I seem to be having some issues on my recordings. Let me just see that it is not causing an issue. It is probably because I may have too many things open on my laptop. So give me a couple of minutes to close the unnecessary applications so it is not interrupted. Let's apologize for that. Can I check that you can hear me and see me
Mhm.
normally,
You're good.
or is there a lag? I'm good, right? Okay, lovely. So it might be at my end only. So I'm going to just
No, I think you do
take
have a lag
some
in your
remedial
video to your
measures.
voice.
I do have a lag.
Mm.
Okay, so then give me a second for to close an few applications here. Okay, I close that and I close my other stuff as well. I had been vibe coding a little bit, so I had a number of coding apps open, which probably has been eating away
Oh, those things
unknowingly
eat the RAM like crazy,
my
especially when you got some Docker
memory.
containers and stuff going. It gets crazy.
Um, luckily, not at the moment. Yeah, but I'm a bit. Oh, yeah, I do have actually Docker desktop running. That could be the reason.
Yeah, that
That
Docker
might as
stuff
well. But I,
will eat that RAM up.
yeah, yeah. So I think it should be okay now. I guess. Yeah. Please continue. My apologies for the interruption.
So, okay, so what I do in my programs is I create files well, that will
Could you
capture
zoom a little
portions
bit?
of it.
Slightly zoom a bit so it's a bit more clearer.
Um,
Command Shift. Is it a Windows or a MacBook? Of course,
no,
if it's a
I
MacBook.
got this like glass brick or something program
Okay.
that I
Okay.
installed that does like zooming. It's really good at that.
All right. Glass brick. I must explore that as well. Glass brick. Okay.
Um, it should be called glass brick.
There it is.
There we go.
Oh, lovely. That's very handy to have. Yeah.
Okay, so this file, all it's doing is capturing all of my files in my code base and putting it into
Hmm.
a single text document, right? And then that
So this
text
is a Python
document,
program. So the Python program that you showed us, combined
mhm.
files. So this is all, when you say all your text files, could you elaborate what you mean by that?
So all of my code files, so like
Oh, okay.
everything that is the main function of the code, like every one of these backend files, every one of the front end files, that every
I
one of the
see.
files that control my ontology, my knowledge graph, that all the files that map everything to GraphDB,
Hmm.
right? I mean, currently I'm not capturing all my test files, but just all of my main files that are basically everything having to do with with the program, when you know what I mean, and uh,
Yeah,
and how
the
everything is set
application
up.
basically, the entire code
Yeah,
base.
yeah,
Hmm.
the entire code base, and then when I run it, then I then get all of my code, which is like 26,000 lines of code right now, right?
Hmm.
And then I can then put this into an AI model. And at first, I was like, well, I'm not getting a whole lot out of these very large context windows, right? Turns out the problem was I just wasn't prompting them right. And you can actually get a lot out of these big context windows. So the first thing I did is I wrote a prompt that took this entire 26,000 lines of code and turned it into JSON. Let's see if I have it in here. Yeah, right here. Right. So
Hmm.
26,000 lines of code. And then I called it Codebase X-Ray. It's just a prompt. Right. And it took
Hmm.
all of this code, turned it into a structured JSON format. And yes, Google Gemini did have to, and you can see my prompt here now. After I put in all the code, then I just put in the prompt for Codebase X-Ray, and then just hit, and then just hit enter. You know, make sure to tell it, don't worry about the length of the prompt, right? And then it's structured in JSON, all the connections of the functions, the variables, everything. And yes, it did take three outputs. And every time I would have to say continue. And then after, halfway through, say the third continue, then it finally
Mhm.
came to a completion. So then I took all of this stuff here, copied it into a single file, a single JSON, and just edited out the continues, and then it all came together perfectly. And I've got 18,000 lines of structured JSON, which basically just says you know this is related to this, and it calls it, or how everything is like
So
interconnected and
let me try and interpret what I heard from you. So if I may, so this is so you have a code base. So your starting point has been a code base. So
Mhm.
this could be any code base. It could be a legacy code base. It could be a code base about a streaming service. It could be a code base about anything, right?
Could be
What you
any program. Yes,
any
under
program,
say
and
you could probably do it under 75,000 lines of code with the context window limitations currently.
so under 75,000 lines of code, any code base, you wrote a file combined Python program, and basically you in your code base you picked every file and you basically concatenated everything into one single file.
Mhm.
Was it just a text file or something like that? Just a normal text file or something? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
what you
yeah.
did?
Here's literally the output. It's just a JSON, like text format. Yeah.
No, before you went to JSON, I think what I heard from you, you
Oh,
ran your combined file.py and you
okay.
joined your entire code base into one big file. Then you
Yep,
took
that's
that
it right
file.
there.
a- okay. And so this is, and then you took this file and fed it into AI Studio and asked
Yes.
AI Studio, Google AI Studio, saying, now that I've given you this information,
Hmm.
create me a correct structured JSON file which looks at all of these files. And I think what you are also alluding to is that Gemini
I
was
gave it
able to then say, well,
I gave it this prompt, the Codebase
right,
X-ray prompt, right here on my
oh, this
GitHub.
prompt.
Yes,
Ah,
just
okay,
this
okay, okay.
exactly.
It's there new.
This handles all of that. All right, and gets the AI to recursively look in on itself, and yeah, and just
And
my
it's
code base plus this
able to,
prompt equals that JSON output.
okay, so it is able to look at any kind of, I guess, a knowledge graph within the code, and it was able to map all of that out as an output. So what
Yep.
function calls what function? What
Yeah.
used to be called
So
as fun?
it
Uh-huh.
was
Is that right?
it was basically able to structure all the relationships between every file, package, module, class, structure, interface, function, method, variable, constant, import, export.
You remind me about something when I was in HSBC when I was working there in 2000. I was there from 2006. Around like 2008, 9, there was this CIO who, and this thing about functional point. So they wanted to measure basically complexity. It was pre-agile kind of story point. And there was this thing about functional points, I think. They were called functional points. Let me Google up. There is actually a term called functional points to measure software complexity. Functional
Hmm.
points. Functional point analysis, exactly. Which look theoretically was very sound, but it was like always very difficult to do. But I guess what you have just
Yeah,
done, you have cracked functional point analysis.
I have, yes.
Probably.
And it is very hard to do because right now you would do it through like AST parsing, through but like the AST, programs are language specific, and for a reason, because it's very difficult to the same parsing technology working across multiple programs. So this is able to use an LLM to get past that, right? And it's basically able to get the output without all the complexity of. And I was figuring out a way to map the code bases across multiple files and multiple languages using AST parsers, and I was having to use like an ID, like a very intricate ID system to be able to identify nodes and their relationships across different files and stuff. It was very difficult to do, but with this one prompt, I could basically get past all of that, which is insane.
What is AST for the benefit of those who may not be aware? What is the full form of of AST?
It's something
What
like
does it do?
a system tree. It maps out like every file. These are programs that will go into say a program here, and then it'll say map out, you know, all the imports, all the functions, all the
Understand.
variables, and how everything is connected in a file, and it puts it out into like a diagram, like a tree format. That
Abstract
makes it
syntax tree. I just did a
yeah,
Google
it
search.
extracts the
Abstract
syntax tree
syntax
exactly.
tree. Tree.
Extracts the code
Ah,
into an easier to read syntax, basically. Yes.
um, something absolutely new to this. So fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we now have
And
the JSON file. Mm.
mhm. Okay. So I have the JSON file. And what I can do with the JSON file, now that we have the entire structure and how everything is interconnected, interweaved in a structured format, well, now we can write programs, right? And so what I've come up here with a blueprint for a test prioritization engine. And this engine is going to be able to take, say, a structured JSON output and then be able to identify, basically parse the entire structure and, you know, see how everything is interconnected with a program and be able to come up with an output that'll basically tell the AI what what to test, right? And so it can make the best test to get to where you need to be. And like I was thinking about this, and I realized I just I just got Gemini to just create an 18,000 line structured JSON from 26,000 lines of code, right? Uh, and if it can do that, it surely can just take the code and come up with all the best tests possible itself. And that's when I came up with this recursive self-learning prompt that creates those tests. And I literally have just ran this. I've ran it through OpenAI's um, deep research, and I also ran it through Gemini, and I liked the answer Gemini gave the best. And it's very important that Gemini is on 2.0, but after copying my entire 26,000 lines of code and then my my comprehensive test plan that, you know, does recursive self-learning and basically came up with the best test possible to get the program. And basically, this is going to tell AI, if you write these tests and pass these tests, your program will work the way you want it to work. Right? Is essentially what this prompt does. Right?
So
It's a
may I
smaller
ask a
part.
question? May
Uh-huh.
I just clarify something at this point?
Mhm.
So to remind ourselves, our starting point was an existing legacy code base, right? So may I ask, what was this particular code base about? Your big code base? What is the functionality of that code?
Yeah, this is a marketing behavior ontology. And
Right.
so let me,
And you had created it at some point in the past,
yeah, I just used LLMs to basically create a marketing behavior ontology. And I'll show you what that does in Open Protege.
which is something like you mentioned the beginning of the discussion, right? When you were trying to look at comments and credit is what I think you mentioned. That was the starting point of your marketing. Was it credit or cars or something like that you
Well,
mentioned
yeah,
there?
I have a business and marketing degree, so I was kind of trying to do
Yeah.
marketing stuff. And
Hmm.
well, one thing that I was, you know, I told you I was working with like the Twitch data in K State, and they were working with the Department of Defense. And one of the things that
Yeah.
they wanted to do was figure out a way to stop people from advertising on TikTok and all these other people selling illegal drugs and bad supplements. You know, because people will just like take a supplement or an illegal supplement and then like change like one little like atom or something in it, and then basically it's legal and people just selling like bad or fake products, right? And so they wanted to know how we could stop it. And well, if these people are selling illegal drugs or bad supplements, they're using the same marketing strategy, right? These people have figured out the best way to sell the goods, and no matter what the good is, they're going to implement the same strategies. So I came up with a ontology, um, or they asked me to come up with an ontology that would track the marketers' behavior patterns, and then I mapped that to the customer behavior patterns. Turns out this is something nobody's doing. And what I'm about to show you here is basically a way of analyzing data
Hmm.
like anything you've ever seen before. All right, so here's my ontology.
Hmm.
And it's got 3,300 axioms, right? And what this thing does is it maps out all of the interactions between the customer and the marketing team and all the basically every single psychological and behavioral interaction a customer would have with a company. It basically classifies that. And all right, so let's say here, if okay, so under marketer behavior, so under market expansion behavior, okay, these are things that this would this completely this contradicts, right? Disjoints. So if I can go through my data set and I can calculate this particular thing, then I know that these things are kind of like are not a thing, right? With that data. But I know that, this is a subclass of these things, and I can maybe calculate these things with this, or say under but, but basically this is a way of mapping how everything is interrelated within. So what I'm able to do is take a data set, like a CSV data set. I took a Brazilian data set from, or a data set from a Brazilian company called Olist, and they had just millions of data entries from all their customers, um, right? Like orders, the freight value, the weight of the freight, um, just everything a company would have, like their customer reviews, their payments, the geolocation of the customers, seller data, basically. And this is just a sample of it, but the actual data set is millions and millions. But to build up my program, I'm just using a sample because it makes it easier. But and so what this is able to do is say you got all this data, right? And let's say maybe you can take two of these data points from these columns and this in this graph, and then like say maybe maybe one or two of the data points from say this data point, and maybe and then I told the LLM, what kind of weird or crazy math can you do to link these together? And then say maybe it's able to do the math on those to be able to create like maybe a time series model or to predict any of these classes or subclasses. Okay. And then if it can predict any of these classes or subclasses, then it can be like, okay, well, I can predict this. Now, what else can I predict that's related to this? And then through this, it's able to map out extremely complex patterns in your data set and allow algorithms to be able to identify things that you would have never imagined possible. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So, so it does. And so obviously now I get it. So it just seems like a big, complicated tree graph that you have, and you
Mm-hmm.
can trace the roots through that graph network effectively, right? That's where you're getting it. So now, if I were to relate it back to where we were in terms of I mean, the test plan or the test assessment that you got. Ah, lovely. This is amazing.
And then you can see how everything is interconnected, right? And it
Yeah,
can
you
expand
can
out
see
in
the
many
link.
ways, right? And so like if it can calculate
This
this, it can
recursive
calculate
in true
this,
nature.
yeah,
And you can have the biases and the weights around all of those interactions, right? So you can actually
yes.
test any
Yeah,
hypothesis
the
that you might
decision
want
biases
on that.
here, social influence factors, and it basically just maps out how everything is interrelated so that when you can calculate, say, one thing, then you know how it's related to everything else, and the algorithms can identify that. It means also that AI can be trained on those complex patterns. It can make more complex predictions that you
So,
would have never even thought possible with your data sets by doing
so
this. So,
one obvious question I think people may have is like when generally LLMs are referenced, the concept of hallucination or like is it true? I mean, how have you validated the accuracy, the sensitivity of the
well,
predictions? You know,
I mean, this is hallucination free, right? This is just taking raw data, and I'm like, okay, this is related to this. I know 100% factual true. I'm a domain expert, and I know that this is a fact, right? And so this is and
But
like and
correlation
just
versus
taking
causality, for example, like there could be correlation between data points, but what about the causality part of it? Like, I mean, how maybe I'm going
well
off.
you would just get that data.
Some-
The customers would be providing you that data through their actions, and you're just recording their
right,
actions and then
right.
analyzing it, the correlations essentially, yeah, with that are like preset that you've been like you've looked over and you're like, yeah, this is the this correlates to this. I know 100% that that's a fact, and it's just like a program that does that correlation and that mapping into GraphDB, right?
Mm,
That's this is 100% hallucination free. No LLM involved in this. I mean, there was an LLM
mm,
involved in coming up with this stuff, but then I
mhm,
after it made it all, then I went through and verified it all as like say the domain expert myself to confirm that I agreed,
mhm,
with the mapping.
mhm.
But yeah,
So if I were to try to put it in a value chain, I guess what it has done is, all the complicated data is kind of created in the model, but then you're then serving that model or that capability to a domain expert like yours, so it could be some other domain expert. So then they have like, okay, I have this hypothesis. Then they have access to structuring a mechanism of basically
yeah.
translating it into
Yeah,
action, right?
yeah. So I'm
Okay, you're
able
showing
to run Sparkle queries on this stuff. So
right.
like this order, it'll say, it was placed by, it'll give a link to the customer. The order was placed by, this person is an agent. And it'll also tell you the context of the order. Maybe it was placed at night, right? And
Right.
it'll give you temporal context. And so, you're going to get all of this information from the Sparkle queries, right? And then the Sparkle queries will update a front end that'll look something like this, all right? And you'll be able to, like, this is using it to track behavior patterns, and this is going to provide, businesses with actionable data that they don't have access to right now, right? But what I've just done here will give them access to predictions they never even thought imaginable. And then basically through the Sparkle queries and querying actual hard data that you get from your customers, you just come up with these calculations type of deal. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Right.
So
And,
you had
and,
built
and
this. You had built this.
yeah.
And going back. Sorry, you were saying something. There's a bit of a lag, so I apologize for that. But did I interrupt something that you were saying?
Oh, um,
No.
so yeah.
Okay.
This is what I was working on currently, and you can kind of see how it has like the different things mapped out in GraphDB,
Oh,
etc.,
no.
and the relationships and stuff. Um,
Help us understand this diagram. What is this? So what are these? So the overlap between the
th- th-
different themes, I
Yeah,
guess.
this is the overlap between the different classes and the different triggers. Like say an agent would be the person, like a qualified lead would be a person, a prospect customer would be a person, a customer would be an agent. Like these are all a real customer or a seller or a marketer or a market follower, right? These are all agents or people and they're all grouped together as under the agent class. And then the behavior is just like the different behaviors, subscription behaviors, search behaviors, right? These are all subclasses of behavior, and it just kind of shows you the hierarchy of how everything is kind of mapped out. And, I showed you this mapping. This is just another way of representing that,
Okay.
and like right here too is like another way of representing things too. But yeah, and so that's the program that I was working on for my final project for my knowledge graph class.
Okay.
And
So
that's the
therefore,
project that was getting loaded into Gemini and these things that I was showing. Yeah.
and what did you so what was the improvement based on your test plan now? So what did you see? So when you ran Gemini to assess, create a test plan, did you know identify? Did you get insights that you had not seen before? Like help us
Oh yeah, absolutely.
understand
No,
like what are the benefits?
like right now I'm just running a demo, so I just want it to work for the class. I'm not worried about making it fully functional, but yeah, Gemini gave me a plan, whatever it is here. I got so many windows open. Yeah. So yeah, Gemini gave me an entire plan to tell me this is where all the tests need to go. These are the high risk areas where you really need to have really good testing. Came up with a testing strategy, told it where you need to prioritize your unit tests. Um, all and it's like these are the files, these are the inputs. This is what things you need to be testing for. This is the critical test. Giving it test priority, what the tests need to target, right? And then testing different integration points, what integration points to test. Um, and this just lays out all the tests that need to be made, right? It took the entire data set plus my prompt that allows you to be able to use huge context windows to be able to identify everything you need to test, right? This is super powerful. This is probably one of the most valuable prompts in existence on the planet right now that I just came up with like an hour ago. Right? It's being able to have the AI without any understanding or knowledge of what's happening, just be able to go through a huge context window and point all the
So,
tests. Mhm.
did you encounter any kind of practical limitations that you had to find a way of working around? So, usually, mostly I see API rate limits, or
Mhm.
um, I guess I have seen you're using obviously AI Studio, but did you use Gemini more so within the Visual Studio environment or anywhere else that, and you may have seen
No,
some practical?
it's good here, and you need this two temperature. This two temperature is what makes it go into like a super detailed mode, right? So when I did this with zero point 0.4 temperature and 1 temperature, the exact same prompt, what I didn't get is this, the context, right? So at the top part, it told me all the tests to make. But it's important that the AI also has the context because it's going to be writing Sparkle queries. So this is giving it the whole context. This is explaining the whole graph, what's all in GraphDB, all the classes, and everything it needs to be able to write the Sparkle queries in the first place, right? And so it did that. And so when I ran this also through, I ran it also through deep research, through
Hmm.
OpenAI's deep research. Here it is.
Okay.
And that gave me this, right? And it is a very good, very detailed plan. It doesn't come with much context though, but it does tell you all the tests that you need to set up. And this did really good too. And one thing you can do with OpenAI is the deep research doesn't have to only research the web, right? I told it only research this document, and this document is just it is the 26,000 lines of code just in one document. Because you can't with OpenAI, you can't just throw this into the context window. It'll reject it. But you can put it into a file, upload the file, and then have it deep research and only use that file. See, one source, right? It did the entire deep research. It ran for 20 or 30 minutes. This was the only source, right? And so you can point the deep research directly at your code base, right? And then that mixed with the same prompt that I gave Gemini gave me this answer, which is still a really good answer, right? I'm not. Don't get me wrong. It might even be better. I haven't tested either or out to see what comes of it, but
So what will be your, now that you have got a critique of the application and the code base and probably suggestions, what would be your next step? How would you make use of this information? And how, and yeah, I
the,
guess.
the, the next step, I would just copy this entire thing into the LLM prompt and be like, make these tests, right? And then once all the tests are made, then I prompt it, pass all the tests. That's it. It's that simple.
And that
All right.
you would do, and I guess, are we coming here to the Spark methodology? Would you be using the Spark framework
Well,
to run your
yeah.
test, or?
Well, if as long as you have the framework and the structure set up, you don't need to use the Spark, right? I mean, the Spark is a way of a workflow of building out the program, right? You start with the specification, you go to the pseudocode, you go to the architecture, and you build it all out. Then you go to refinement, and then that's like when the testing comes in, right? And And so once you have like the base, then you can just be like, all right, these are the tests I need to set up. And with this allows it to just like take the whole code and just tell you all the tests you need to write, right? And then if all those tests that just told you to write pass, program should function.
So you effectively covered the whole gamut of refactoring, right? I guess to remind ourselves again, taking legacy code base, which is a common problem, and we talk
Hmm.
about like some of my in change and transformation, my challenges had been to look at, I guess, migration to cloud, whether it is GCP, AWS, or Azure. One of the biggest, I think, drivers they quote is, we're going to modernize your code. We're going to use the latest and greatest of things, right?
Right.
But organizations still struggle because there's functioning code. It is expensive. There is limited knowledge about that code generally. But I think what you are demonstrating here potentially is a glimpse into a future where you could take some of the legacy code base, look at really understanding at a deep level,
Yep.
feeding in your most recent context. What is it that you want to look ahead in the future, effectively? What is it that you want to do in the future in terms of business outcomes? And actually go through a process. And you're one person doing this, right? You're one person with an AI, set of
Yep.
AI agents working together step by step along the
And then you just
journey.
figure out what you want to do, where you want the program to go, and then use this strategy to have the AI spit out all the tests you need to get you there. And then you just send AI on a path to passing those tests. And then once it's done
Uh,
passing all the tests, the program's where you want it, then you're good.
okay. No, I'm even now thinking back about the initial program that you wrote, which you said like you saw a challenge in the market, a pain problem, some discussions, and you seem to have
Mhm.
created that very complicated set of application, the marketing application from scratch initially, right? And then
Yeah.
just to remind ourselves, you said you didn't have any coding background 2 years ago. You have
No.
used AI to effectively piecemeal look at things and effectively create that looks like a very comprehensive, application. Looks like yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I was starting with GPT 3.5, copying the outputs in the notepad files. I didn't even know VS Code was a thing. Yeah. Yeah. That's how noob I was at the time. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess, how does one reproduce what you have achieved? What would be your, looking back, what are your learnings from it? Like, how, is there a template that people could follow to say, okay, let me follow this step by step so I can go to maturity level 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to the level perhaps where you are today? What should be the way?
Build what you want. Um, you can build so much. Computer programs solve so many problems. Just start building programs that solve your problems. Build programs that you want to build. It doesn't matter what it is, right? You just need to get to doing it, right? And build stuff that's useful to you, right? And that you enjoy and that you want to build. And then that way when it is done, you get that reward and you get that satisfaction. And the AI, I mean, with what you can do today, now that you got the coding assistants and everything that we have set up, it's so much different than when I first started. It's night and day. And just you just need to get out there and just start building programs and just trying different things. Just know that AI will have your back no matter what you want to do. AI will basically present you with a recipe that you just follow for anything that you want to do, right? It'll just give you the recipe. You just have to start asking the question. That's the important thing about AI is you need to ask the questions. And
Hmm.
if you're doing that, you're good, right? And yeah,
Fascinating.
it'll take a little bit of time to build up to because at first, like, these coding assistants and cursor and stuff, they were just doing stuff, and yeah, I didn't have any idea what they were doing. But you can actually now, with those, it makes it easier because you can just read what they're doing, right? And just in reading, just eventually you will pick up and understand stuff, and just after doing, I didn't even know what pips were. And then after like the eighth time of having to install them, I finally clicked in my head, right? So it's just doing what AI tells you and you do it enough, you eventually just pick up everything, you know?
Mhm. So one, I think looking at that, we've been talking very passionately on this, almost just under an hour now. So which is good. Um, in terms of tools, like obviously you have an understanding of what your challenges in your current code base is. To fix
Mhm.
it, would you have any particular preferences for us? You mentioned Cursor. We have spoken about Visual Studio and Roo Code, for example, as well as an
Mhm.
extension there. There
Yeah.
is Windsurf, and then obviously there are methodologies like Spark. Um, there are multiple language models, some very expensive, some not, different. How would you decide to choose one? Or would you have any rule of thumb to determine?
To
Because
debug
obviously
something.
to debug or to refactor your code base. So for example, if identified a lot of improvements or testing
Mhm.
potential improvements in your code base, how would you go about executing that in terms of
Well,
choice
now I
of
would use
tools?
my now that I've just built these prompts in the last couple of days, I would just use the prompts. I would use like Google AI Studio, put it on 2 temperature, and then use my prompts to identify where to place tests. That's all you need to do at this point. Now that I've kind of figured out that prompt and I've got this prompt, I just changed the game. Right? Like
So,
what I would
so
have
you're
told you
taking
to do
s-
yesterday is different from today, actually.
so you're taking in stages. You're not going to ask the AI to now take your test improvement plan and start making changes in the code.
Well, it's gonna.
Rather, are you saying you're going to still do some
Well,
individual elements within AI
if you
Studio
wanted to,
first?
if you wanted to change the code, you would want to change it through the Spark architecture, right? You would
Yeah, that's
first
where I was coming
want
to.
you would want the AI model like Gemini to have full contextual understanding of your code, right? And I need to develop actually a prompt for this. Um, and then once it has that, then it can come up with a Spark plan, right? That will then write out the specification and the architecture, and then code out the framework um, to build onto your program, and then use my test prompt to identify what tests you need to set up, and then just have it start passing the tests. Is how I would do it. Um,
Mm,
and how I did do it when I
step by
built
step.
my back end and front end onto this program here. Yeah. So yeah, like if you're gonna like this program has a back end, a front end, and the whole knowledge graph portion. I just built out the knowledge graph portion first, right? And where it was mapping the data into triples into the graph database. I did all that first, and then on top, and then I built the front end and the back end. Came up with a Spark plan to implement that, and right now I'm just running tests and finalizing that. But yeah,
So I wish we see, look forward to seeing your improvements over coming days. Um, I guess this has been very interesting for me to see how in a big problem has been decomposed into individual elements, and you're using AI in a I guess containerized manner to solve
yes,
and give you inputs on a specific phase.
yeah,
So there's a bit of
yeah, and
structure
if
that
you
you're using AI for.
yeah, if you are doing big problems projects, it is nice when you're using AI to containerize it with Docker containers too. I did find that when I was doing the code graph project and I was having to containerize a lot of things. It has to send messages between each of the containers, and the AI
Mm,
reads those messages, and so then it is able to then pinpoint where the problem is, or at least which container the problem lies in, and then it can just look at that container, right, for the fixes to the problem, right? Like if we give it 26,000 lines of code, it's a lot harder for it to identify the problem than if you break that into chunks of say 8, and now you've been like, okay, well this problem lies in this 4,000 code section. It's a lot easier for it to find the problem in the 4,000 lines of code than 26,000. So containerizing can also help the AI with debugging and things like and working with AI and code.
amazing. Chris, really appreciate sharing your experience. I guess I'm just thinking, looking around, if there were anything else I would wanted to ask you, but over to you first. Like, do you have kind of any thoughts, comments, anything that you want to mention before we probably move
No, I'm just
forward?
been working on, I started off trying to trying to figure out how to make it as easy as possible for somebody with no computer knowledge to write whatever program they want. And that's kind of what I've been working towards. So, and the big thing is it's all down to the tests, right? The tests are the
And the
tests are the key.
requirement.
They're
Mhm.
the requirement. Yeah. A good solid set of tests are the requirement. And if you can pass all the tests, the problem is that even when I do pass all the tests, oftentimes I will find that there might be one or two things that the test didn't catch that I need to then clean up. And so that's kind of the final frontier is because when you just wrote 25,000 lines of code and you don't know how to read code and you need to now identify those one or two things that are wrong, it's like the craziest game of Where's Waldo? You know what I mean? And so now I'm having to break everything down, end to end, the entire pipeline, um, and then basically have the AI tell me, what does this file do? What does this file do? And read it, understand it, completely understand the whole code base to be able to identify these little things, right? Which, I mean, you should understand your code base, but
Mm.
that part actually did
The
take me some
human,
time.
the art of the human AI interface, I think, is what the next frontier really is around this. On that note, Chris, thank you for your time today. It's been lovely speaking to you. I look forward to probably in the future, once you have taken the next steps, to go over the improvements and how you've applied that. But until then, have a lovely rest of. Is it a holiday in the US as well today?
It is not. I don't believe
It's
so.
not, is it?
Or I
Okay.
wouldn't know which.
All
I
right.
work every day, right? I sit
Oh,
here
okay.
and play and tinker with code all day. I don't ever feel. I feel like every day's a
That's
holiday.
passion. Yeah, that's
Playing with
passion. You
AI
you
and
you
coding.
you you, you follow passion on holidays as well. So I do as well. So it's okay.
Yep, yep.
But on that note, enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you for your time and speak soon again. Take care.
Very welcome. Thank you for the
Bye bye.
invite and have a wonderful
No,
day.
you're welcome. Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye. Session.